Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Kieran Moylan. I'm a Principal Officer in the Department of Rural and Community Development, and you're very welcome to the third webinar in our series on the development of the local economic and community plans. I see we have over 70 participants here today, which we're glad to see, and we hope that you'll find the event useful. Today's webinar has been planned in cooperation with colleagues in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and I wish to acknowledge from the outset their support in helping us in the planning of this event and in the preparation of some of the presentations that you're going to hear this morning. As you know, the local economic and community plan guidelines state very clearly that the plan is a key framework through which climate actions can be delivered at local level. The LECPs play a very important role in coordinating the actions that will contribute to Ireland meeting its climate action targets over the years ahead as set out in the national plan. And as you know, there are also regional offices in place to provide training, support, advice and capacity building to local authorities in development of their own respective climate action plans, and also support for the wider sector in that regard. Sustainable development is a cross-cutting principle in the LECP plans, and we have to have regard to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which call for sustainable and inclusive development at all levels and strengthen partnerships to ensure the delivery of those sustainable development goals. So we'll be speaking about the role that the goals will play in the framing of your action plans. Our webinar is scheduled to run till 1 p.m. And we would request, I suppose, all the speakers, insofar as possible, to stick to this time slots that are available so that we can have everybody out by lunchtime. There will be an opportunity for you to discuss your reactions to what you hear today in the networking conversation session, and Ali will explain to you later how that's going to work. So there will be an opportunity for you to discuss among a number of your peers, and also there's an opportunity then to give back your individual feedback in relation to questions we're going to pose. You can also use the chat function during the webinar if you wish, and we will try and respond to those as we go along. And if not, we'll certainly come back on any clarifications that are needed after the webinar. You can find copies of the presentations from the two previous webinars on our departmental website. So if you go into DRCD website, click on the community development section and then click on local government, you'll see there the copies of all of the previous presentations, and also we will be putting the presentations from today's webinar up on that site as well, so you can refer back to or forward on to colleagues who are not able to attend today. Also, just for your diaries, our final webinar in the series is going to look at a number of thematic areas in the area of community and social development, and this will take place on the 22nd of June. So that's the fourth webinar in the series, and we'll be sending more details closer to that event. So just to get started then, we're starting with an overview of national climate policy development from Stephen Lee in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. Stephen is an Administrative Officer in the Division for Environment and Climate Action Plan Delivery. And there's also going to be a short input at the end of the presentation on the Just Transition Fund from Louise Casey, who's an Assistant Principal Officer responsible for Just Transition and Sectoral Policy. So over to you, Stephen, and then Louise. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kieran. So just to make sure, can everyone see my slides?
So I'll just respond, yes, so we can see them. They're not up in the full screen view for us yet, Stephen, but we can certainly see them.
Okay, that should be working now.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. So yeah, as Kieran said, myself and my colleague Louise, we're from the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications, and we're going to be providing an overview of the major climate policy developments that have happened in Ireland over the last couple of years. So first of all, just also like to say thanks very much to the organisers of this webinar for inviting us to present, and hopefully what we do present will be of interest. So just an overview of the topics we're on to cover. So I'll cover these first three topics: the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Amendment Act 2021, which for the sake of simplicity, I'll just refer to as the Climate Act, then the Climate Action Plan, and finally a process which we're in the middle of at the moment, which is the carbon budgets and sectoral emission ceilings. And then I'll hand you over to Louise, who's going to talk about the EU Just Transition Fund and potential for the local economic and community sector. So I'll start by giving an overview of the Climate Act, which was passed in July 2021. So this represented a step change in Ireland's climate ambition, because it essentially gave a statutory basis to our climate ambition to have emissions by 2030 and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. So really you can think of it as, I suppose, sort of transitioning our goal or our objective into something that's legally binding. And does this through ensuring the delivery of successive climate action plans, long-term strategies, national adaptation frameworks, and a topic which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. It also provides for the introduction of a carbon budget program and the sectoral ceilings. So one of the first things that was delivered under the new Climate Act is last year's Climate Action Plan, with the subtitle Securing Our Future. So this was published in November 2021, and it was followed in December with an annex of actions, which basically set out detailed steps and kind of a maps of implementation for the different measures laid out in the plan. It also specified ownership of the different actions. So if you think of the Act as the kind of piece that sets into stone our ambition, the Climate Action Plan is what lays out the roadmap of how we're going to actually achieve that ambition. It was developed through extensive consultation with our own divisions here in DECC, but also with other departments such as agriculture, enterprise, transport, and others, and those departments' agencies. We also procured external analytical support, and this is a topic that there's huge public interest in. There's a lot of passion, and we received huge numbers of submissions to our public consultation. So it was truly a collaborative piece of work with lots of different voices and perspectives feeding into it. And yeah, as I said, it does kind of identify the specific measures and the actions that will help us to achieve our climate goals. That last point there is that it includes indicative ranges for emissions reduction in different sectors. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've lifted this table on the next slide directly from the Climate Action Plan. So you can see we have our different sectors of the economy in the left column. The second column then outlines what their emissions were in megatons carbon dioxide equivalent in 2018. Then for 2030, we have these indicative ranges. So you're going to hear me mentioning ranges over the next few minutes, and basically this is what I'm referring to. So this again is from the 2021 Climate Action Plan. The next edition of the Climate Action Plan, which will be published in Q4 of this year, is going to have specific binding targets rather than indicative ranges. And the process that we're currently engaged in of setting sectoral emission ceilings is essentially boils down to putting a specific number on the maximum emissions from any one sector of the economy. And as I said, these will replace the indicative ranges. So I'll move on now. Just a quick word on the Climate Action Plan 2023. So this again will build on the previous Climate Action Plan. It's called the Climate Action Plan 2023, even though it will be published in the last quarter of this year, because it's supposed to reflect that it's a forward-looking document. And yeah, the second point really there is the key one, that it will be defined sectoral emission ceilings rather than ranges. And we are currently getting the process started of preparing that document. It'll likely look quite similar to the development of the last iteration. So again, through extensive stakeholder engagement and public consultation. So just a word, I'm aware this is quite a text-heavy slide, but on the carbon budget. So this is something that you might have been hearing a lot about recently. So we have some key definitions at the top. So a carbon budget is the total amount of emissions expressed in megatons carbon dioxide equivalent that may be emitted by a country during a specific time period, typically, well, in this case, 5 years. And then the sectoral emission ceilings is essentially a carbon budget for a specific sector. So it's the amount of emissions that may be emitted by one sector. And, you know, generally a carbon budget is divided into relevant sectoral emission ceilings. So I won't go too deeply into the process of approving and adopting the carbon budgets, but just to say that the stage we're currently at is that motions on the carbon budgets were debated and approved by both houses at the beginning of last month, and thereby came into effect on the 6th of April. And what we're currently engaged in now is consultation, again, with relevant departments and other stakeholders to define what exactly the sectoral emission ceilings will look like for each sector of the economy. Once that is brought to government, it'll need to be approved, and then it will come into effect. And as I said, it'll be reflected in the next iteration of the Climate Action Plan. And this is just a little bit more about that process that we're now engaged in. So the Climate Act stipulates that the sectoral emission ceilings must be brought to government as soon as feasible, or as soon as may be. So really time is of the essence in that regard. And yeah, the second last point there is kind of gives an indication of the timing. So the Minister of the Environment, Eamon Ryan, intends to take a proposal to government by the end of June. So she'll be hearing quite a lot about that over the coming weeks. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Louise Casey now, who will talk you through the EU Just Transition Fund.
Thanks, Stephen. I suppose we're all in agreement that this is the way forward and that climate action has to happen. But I suppose there's a consciousness at a policy level that moving away from fossil fuels is going to impact on some more than others. And the just transition is about ensuring that this can happen in a fair way and leaving no one behind. So you may be familiar, there was a National Just Transition Fund, which happened as part of the Climate Action Plan. And I'm just here to flag that there is an EU Just Transition Fund, which is in development at the moment. So we're at an early stage. So primarily today, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what's happening with it, and just to see potential opportunities for the support in the local authorities, and that how we can work together to ensure that that fund gets into communities and places that it needs to go. And we will see the LECP as a key vehicle for that. So the EU Just Transition Fund is a new fund, and it aims to address not just economic, socio-economic impacts on communities and the territories most affected by the transition. And in Ireland, that's considered to be the Midlands area, where there's particular impacts because of peat extraction being ceased for production commercially, and also for production for electricity. So this fund is to support a fairer, more balanced climate transition. So I'm conscious I'm talking to a variety of local authorities, and this may not be of huge interest to all of you, but the purposes of this fund, it needs a territorial just transition plan. And we had the draft up for consultation from the end of last year to the middle of February. And that has undertaken rigorous analysis and is focusing on counties Laois, Longford, Offaly, Westmeath, Roscommon, and I'm missing one there. Leash, Longford, Offaly, Westmeath, Roscommon, and then municipal districts in Ballinasloe in County Galway, Athy and Clane in Kildare, and Carrick-on-Suir and Thurles in County Tipperary. So I realise I've probably lost half my audience now, but if you're in those particular counties, what I want to do is to speak to you and also to reassure you that when the programme crystallised that we will be engaging with the LECPs, but for the purposes of today, it's to let you know what's coming down the line so you can prepare for it. So 8.4 or 84.5 million in EU funding is available, and that will be match funded by the Exchequer. So as I mentioned previously, this involves preparation of a plan and an operational programme, which must be approved by the European Commission by the end of this year. So this is going to set out investment priorities and the regions and sectors to be targeted. And it has been decided that the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly will manage the funds. So many of you will be familiar with that body. And they will manage the fund and potentially competitive funding calls. So while the programme hasn't been finalised yet, we've obviously consulted on particular development needs, and it's likely there will be a priority focusing on the local economic and community sector within this territory and potential actions that could align with this plan and programme. So when we went to consultation, we looked at development needs, which are listed there, how to enhance the business environment, create employment opportunities, and also looking at economic diversification in the region to see how we can explore new areas to I suppose, compensate for those lost, how we can enhance the skills profile. So particularly focusing on those who are affected by the transition away from peace and offer new opportunities. Focus on environmental sustainability and industrial heritage, and also how the fund can enhance the potential of the region as a place to live and work. So in terms of the local economic and community sector, actions under this priority need to be framed within the LCDC policy. So the forthcoming LECP frameworks and implementation plans in the region are going to be key for any potential actions that could be funded under the EU Just Transition Fund. So I suppose at this stage, we're asking for Midlands counties that they consider how the LECP can support delivery of actions that could enable a just transition in the region, and how they can form part of the LECP in terms of specific actions or possibly an implementation plans. So we're mindful of the LECP guidelines, and this needs to include setting the local context for mainstream funding programs and inclusion of sustainable community objectives. And that focuses on addressing the transition and how that may be in line with suggested sustainable community objectives. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples of relevant areas covered, just by way of a prompt, but community-based services, enhanced education and training, creation of new jobs, including the low carbon and green economy, so new opportunities within the region, and the contribution that communities can make to addressing climate change through mitigation and adaptation, and then circular economy is another area as well. So looking at targeted actions in education and training, creation of jobs in the low carbon and green economy, and how communities can make a contribution to addressing climate change through various mitigation and adaptation actions. So look, I know it's a small piece in a larger presentation, so I just wanted to give you a snapshot. There's a link there in the slides to more information on the fund, and there's also an email address for anyone who wants to reach out to us to inquire about anything in particular. Thank you.
Great. Just inviting you to unmute, Kieran.
Yep. Okay, thanks very much, Stephen and Louise. That's been very helpful. And I think, Louise, there may be further information events for the specific areas concerned coming up as well. So it was just an opportunity to flag that for the 8 local authorities concerned, that this is something that they need to build into their LECP plan. So thanks very much again for that, and Stephen. Okay, so now we move on to, I suppose we started with the high-level overview of Ireland's climate action plans. So now we're getting a little bit closer to the local authority level. So I just call on Rob Mooney maybe to set up his share slide link. And Rob is Assistant Principal in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and he's going to speak about local authority climate action plans and the national dialogue. So Rob, your 15 minutes starts now, and off you go.
Sure. Give me 1 second. Apologies, I'm having trouble sharing my slides for 1 sec. Okay. Just confirm you can see that?
Yeah, that's great. You can see that in the edit mode. And
okay.
That's come up full screen now.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much. And it's again, it's a pleasure to be here. As Kieran introduced me, I'm Rob Mooney of the Department of Environment. I've 2 key, I suppose, areas of responsibility. One is the national dialogue and climate action, and the other is the local authority climate action plans. There are 2 quite separate entities, but they also coexist, which hopefully I can bring you through in my 15 minutes. I think 14 and a half now this morning. So I'll go fairly at pace in the recognition that there'll be time for Q&A later. Just to set out to build on what my colleagues presented already, as part of the Climate Action Act, it is required that each local authority will develop a local authority climate action plan. So this is now established in legislation. In terms of the timeframes, the minister will have 18 months to instruct, from the enactment of the Act, to instruct each local authority to develop their climate action plan. And I'll talk about the timeframe for that in a moment. After that instruction, each local authority will have 12 months to develop these and finalize these plans and submit them, okay? So I'll show you what that phased approach looks like in a moment. To give you a flavor of what the view or the ambition for the plans is that each plan should be attempted to drive kind of adaptation and critically mitigation measures at that local level. You know, we'll see each local authority trying to translate, in one way, trying to translate the national climate policy to local circumstances, but critically prioritize and accelerate it, you know, evidence-based measures to deliver our ambitions to reach climate neutrality, as again, my colleagues had already laid out. But what we want to do within the development of these plans is to ensure that we're building on the extensive knowledge at the local level, via the local authority, local communities, etc., of the natural and built environment in that area, to ensure that the climate action plans that are developed are appropriate for that local authority area, but also are then obviously critically linked to and deliver against our national, the National Climate Action Plan targets and actions. So to give you a flavour of the time frame we're looking at, we're sort of have entered phase 1 at the moment, which really, I suppose, started once the Act came into force. So the phase 1 approach really looks at establishing the evidence base. So, you know, working with some local authorities, we've started on CAROs. We're starting to develop or work towards that. Look at resource requirements. So we're working again with local authorities to identify what existing work is happening, but also what other requirements will be, or what other resources they're required to help deliver against the ambitions, the increased ambitions in the local authority climate action plans. What they need to do to deliver against the national climate action plan, and then looking at the inclusion of the decarbonisation zone guidelines, which are now going to be incorporated into the local authority climate action plans as well. Phase 2 will then begin at the, so this will bring us up to the end of the year. Phase 2 will really begin at the end of this year, start of next year, when the minister instructs each local authority to develop the plans. Then we've got a 12-month period to actually have a final plan ready for submission by each local authority. Now that is it is a big task in that this will require the identification of, you know, KPIs about energy, about decarbonisation, but also about community engagement, about promoting climate action across the community and delivering collectively, mirroring a lot of the work that we're doing at the national level. So it isn't just about, you know, delivering against what the local authorities are directly responsible in terms of their own buildings or transport, but looking at things like EV infrastructure, etc. And then we're moving into phase 3, which will be full implementation, which will begin at the start of 2024. And at that point, we will expect local authorities to be in a position where they can start full implementation, including reporting against these KPIs and targets periodically. So there's one challenge that we recognize is to allow for the continuity of the provision of existing services, alongside, as I said, the transformation towards realizing climate action with communities around Ireland, but also again delivering at that national level. So what we're starting to do is to look at, well, what is the National Climate Action Plan? What are the key sort of sectoral areas or key chapters within the plan, and what are they looking to achieve? So obviously, as previous speakers already pointed out, things like just transition is a core central delivery, or central requirement across all of society, and it sort of weaves its way through everything that we're doing. My other role is in citizen engagement, and a key part of that is, you know, that just transition piece. So people recognize and are aware of the importance of just transition. But there are a number of other key areas, as we've seen: electricity, enterprise, built environment, transport, land use, circular economy, etc., that are all directly relevant to the work of each local authority. So what we're trying to do at this phase 1 stage is to map effectively what local authorities are already doing, look at, you know, how they can map against the National Climate Action Plan ambitions, to identify what we can, or what is already being delivered, and as I said, do an effective gap analysis to determine what needs to be delivered over and above that. And that's where our resource discussion is happening at the moment. I suppose critically, it isn't just about delivering the National Climate Action Plan. As I said, these local authority climate action plans are going to be designed in a way that have to be relevant to the local area. So they have to be you know, ambitious, action-focused, evidence-based, but also critically, they have to be participative and transparent. So they have to be co-designed with key stakeholders, much like the Climate Action Plan is through our national climate conversations on an annual basis. So there's a key role for citizen and community and stakeholder engagement in their co-creation. Again, just to reiterate, the view of the local authority climate action plans is in recognition of the role each local authority has, the access they have, the knowledge they have of their local area, but also the core coordination and governance structures that exist. And I know my colleagues later on are going to talk about the role of CAROs in detail, so I won't touch on that too much. But just to ensure that we're making those links and strengthening those links between national and international climate policy, and delivering effective climate action through, again, place-based climate action. I know my colleagues are talking about the role of CAROs later, but just to emphasize that we also view the role of CAROs, which had traditionally been in the adaptation space, as moving significantly into this adaptation and mitigation space, and to help in a revised governance approach to the coordination of the delivery of local authority climate action plans. So as I said earlier, so whilst we're looking to support the co-creation of each LECP and develop new effective governance structures to ensure that we're linking the national and the local, this will be based on updates on the development and delivery as clearly defined KPIs within each LECP. And that, again, if you're familiar with the National Climate Action Plan, you'll see that the Annex of Actions requires reporting against KPIs. I think there's over 1,000 actions within that. So it'll be a similar type approach. And again, the purpose of that is to ensure that we are adopting a similar kind of methodology or approach to the local authority level as we are at the national level, and ensuring that we can have consistency across both. So I want to give it like a really quick example that may not be the most obvious example. And I know we talked about carbon emissions, etc. And there's more tangible examples such as energy or carbon or even things like transport. But the other area that I work in is, again, citizen engagement. As part of our climate conversations every year, so we go out, we talk to the public, we hold online public consultations, but we engage with the likes of the PPNs, with other ENGOs, with a range of stakeholders across society to help us identify where people are in terms of their knowledge, their engagement with climate action. So what we've seen, and ultimately what we've come out with is, or identified, is that the public are articulating their view of climate action as that government must lead at all levels and must lead by example, but delivering this ambition is the responsibility of everyone in society. So that's the sentence I keep coming back to time and time again. As part of the climate conversations, we found that people were enthusiastic to work with government at all levels. And I think critically, we're talking about the role of local authorities here. But we also were able to identify where people are making changes, what they can do already, what they know, what knowledge they have, and how they can start delivering and changing their behaviors. But also where they lack information, knowledge, resources, or capacity to start delivering this in a practical sense. And fundamentally, out of all, we talked to 3,800 people and a whole range of stakeholders across society. This sentence summed up the findings for me, which were people asked for joined up thinking. So this is at the national level, at the local level, and going to Louise's point about the EU just transition, linking all the way up to the work that we're involved in at the European level. People want joined up thinking, they want ambitious policies, and they want to be reflected where they live. And I think that is the key to delivering on our ambitions towards carbon neutrality. I have a number of other notes here just to really quickly point out that a lot of those conversations we had fed directly into the design of the National Dialogue on Climate Action and will feed into the citizen engagement and co-creation of local authority climate action plans, or ambitions toward them. The NDCA itself will be delivered across 3 key pillars. One is climate literacy, which is literally ensuring people have enough knowledge or capacity to start making changes that are meaningful for them. We're going to be supporting that through a series of local and national engagement activities. And we're also capturing critical insights from our engagement activities, but we also have a large national social and behavioral research program working with the EPA. And we're hoping to have a segmentation study completed in the next month or so that will allow us to identify where people are in terms of their engagement, the challenges they face, etc., across society at that local level. So that should provide a core evidence base to begin thinking about what are the challenges here and where are the public with us on this at that local authority level. Just some examples of our national activity. We've held the National Climate Stakeholder Forum this year. We're holding another one in July. We held the first National Youth Assembly on Climate Action. We're launching our climate conversations. Again, the 2022 climate conversations, hopefully toward the end of this month or early June. And we work with the EPA in a series of national climate conferences and lectures. At a local level, we'll try to support local climate conversations through the Creative Ireland programme, through the Climate Action Fund, etc., but also working with local authorities to promote these at that local level. We're supporting network and capacity building through those funds, and we're also going to be hosting a national climate conversation event on local action. And this is where we're going to bring local authorities, local communities together toward the end of the year in a 1 or 2 day conference to talk about their experience of delivering against their climate ambitions, how effective they've been, share examples of best practice, and hopefully share some ideas about how we can scale those examples of best practice across different areas and different authorities. So just at my final slide, and I apologize, I wasn't timing myself very well there, Kieran. I hope I'm still within my 15-ish minutes. But just to say that it's our view really that the LECPs are fundamental to allow us to deliver coherent, consistent, and systematic approach to delivering our ambitions to reach carbon neutrality. And that what we want to do is do this in a way that allows us to share resources, and that includes ideas and approaches, but also allow for each LECP to tailor their solutions to the local authority area, and then fundamentally for us in a way that allows systematic feedback to provide insights and input to the National Climate Action Plan. I just want to point out as well and to reiterate, this is really, really important. I spoke to the Energy Performance Officer meeting this week. what we need to emphasize, we're already delivering a lot of this work. And I think I don't need to talk to you guys, you know this very clearly, but some of this is just reorganizing and reframing this as part of a climate action plan. And ultimately our goal is to really strengthen mutual supports between national and local government. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Rob, for that presentation. And again, we're getting, I think, a better flavour now of the work that will need to be done at local level in relation to meeting our national obligations and also the statutory requirements around climate action planning. Okay, so I call now on Hannah Gilmartin, just come up on screen, and Hannah, maybe to start sharing your screen on the Sustainable Development Goals. So Hannah is an Assistant Principal Officer in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and Hannah works in the unit that deals with the Sustainable Development Goals. So over to you, Hannah.
Hi, thanks, Kieran. I hope everyone can see my slides there. Just put them up, trying to keep the timings. So first of all, it's great to be here today to talk to you all about the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, as they're usually referred to. As you may already be aware, a whole of government approach has been taken to implementation of the SDGs. But the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, where I work, is responsible for the coordination and oversight of this implementation. So I'm going to try and cover a fair few things over the next 15 minutes, as there's quite a few updates and pieces of information I'd like to run through. So first of all, we'll just briefly look at some background. I don't always want to expect that people know that much about the SDGs. Then I'm going to move on to current implementation approaches, and feedback that we received as part of our 2021 consultation process. We will then briefly cover the new national implementation plan. The draft is open for consultation at the moment. And finally, I'll be running through some ideas and tips about how you can incorporate the SDGs into your work, and specifically the LECPs. So just to begin, and as a very quick overview for those of you who may not be familiar with the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted in 2015 by all 193 United Nations member states, including Ireland. And it basically sets out a framework for how to achieve a more sustainable, prosperous and peaceful future by 2030. And it's a framework made up of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which you can see here. And there's also 169 individual targets. So I suppose a common misconception is that the SDGs are only environment focused. And you often find that the person dealing with the SDGs is in the climate unit. But as you can see on the slide, they are very comprehensive and address economic, social and environmental dimensions. And I suppose within Ireland, the most similar equivalent with synergies would be the new wellbeing framework. So it's also worth noting that none of the topics covered by the 17 SDGs are new. They all relate to issues which countries and organisations were already working on, but they provide a framework to be used, and a key is the fact that all the goals are interdependent. And I suppose I keep repeating the word framework because the key message I want you to take away from today is that the work you're already doing is contributing significantly to the SDGs, and whether you're making those links or not. But what we want to start doing now is making those contributions more explicit, to start capturing and recording them so that we can see how goals are being progressed and which goals are being prioritised. So we are currently in the process of finalising Ireland's second national implementation plan, which I'll talk about shortly. But it's worth noting that Ireland's first plan identified local government as having a crucial role to play in translating national policies into tangible, practical actions and to connect the SDGs with individuals and communities. And it highlighted structures such as the LCDCs, SPCs, development plans and LECPs as crucial to achieving this. And it also emphasised the important role of PPNs. Now, unfortunately, the first plan didn't have specific actions included in respect of local government that were reported on or monitored. So as part of our consultation process, we wanted to get a sense of how this work was progressing and where supports were required. So we held our consultation process last summer, and it contained 3 strands, which are captured here in the box. We received nearly 900 returns from local authorities and over 5,000 in total. But essentially, overall feedback is a desire for greater ambition, communication and opportunity to engage with the SDGs, a need for a more joined up approach to implementation, and the importance of using Agenda 2030 as a framework to ensure a just, sustainable and green recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic. So the first thing we wanted to gauge was what were the current awareness levels of the SDGs within government departments, local authorities and state agencies. Surprising was just how similar the returns were for the three. As you can see here, the pie charts are almost identical. What unfortunately was not hugely surprising was the low levels of awareness. So approximately a quarter of respondents were aware of the SDGs and how they related to their work. Approximately a third were aware of the SDGs, but they didn't understand or know how they actually related to the work they were doing. And approximately 40% of all respondents were not aware of the SDGs at all. So there really is an important piece of work here to be done in terms of education and providing tools so that officers understand how the SDGs relate to their work and so that they can make use of the framework that it provides. In terms of engagement levels then, we asked respondents to indicate whether they had used any of the methods for incorporating the SDGs into their work as listed on the left-hand side of this slide. The dark blue bar is response from respondents in government departments and the light blue bar are the responses from local authorities. Again, very similar returns. The majority, unfortunately, 65% had not made use of any method to incorporate the SDGs into their work, whereas approximately a quarter had worked individually or as part of a team to progress a target or goal. So really, we really want to turn this around, and we've included a lot of quite ambitious actions in our new implementation plan. This slide captures the top 5 recommendations from the local authority survey as to how to better support the integration of SDGs into local authority work. They include training, toolkits, greater communication, awareness raising, identification of an SDG officer for each local authority. And then number 5 here, respondents really highlighted the importance of incorporating the SDGs into existing structures and outputs provided by the corporate and county development plans and the LECPs. And a number of respondents expressed the view that this should be made obligatory and reported on. They also highlighted the importance of the quality of incorporation, how it should not amount to a standalone paragraph referencing the SDGs. And many respondents recognised that a lot of the work of local authorities is already contributing to the SDGs and really just felt that what was needed was for local authorities to begin mapping that work and linking in with other local authorities in other counties to identify best practice. This is some of the feedback received as part of the public consultation. These are just a kind of example of some of it, which is more relevant to today's meeting. Essentially, respondents want better incorporation of the SDGs into policies, plans and strategies. They want greater opportunity to engage with the SDGs and alignment of the SDGs with local community action. Engagement should be inclusive, accessible to all and adhere to the principle of leave no one behind. So the feedback provided as part of the 2021 consultation process was used to directly inform the priorities and actions developed in the new draft implementation plan. So the draft was published last week for consultation and submissions will be accepted until Tuesday the 14th of June. The SDG National Stakeholder Forum is also being relaunched and held next Thursday the 2nd of June as an additional means for stakeholder input. And more detail can be found on gov.ie. So the plan contains 5 strategic objectives, which are listed on the slide here. I won't read through them all, but you'll see that strategic objective number 2 is to integrate the SDGs into local authority work to better support the localization of the SDGs. And the plan also reflects the requirement of a multi-stakeholder approach, with action being taken at all levels and by all stakeholders in order to fulfill the vision and goals of Agenda 2030. So 20 case studies have been included in the plan to showcase some examples of best practice projects and programs being progressed across the country. Just to highlight, case study 3 showcases how Dublin City Council has incorporated the SDGs into their 2020 to 2024 corporate plan, and how they mapped the goals and priority objectives of the corporate plan to how they would contribute to achieving the SDGs. And I'd certainly recommend having a look at this case study if you're looking for ideas on how to incorporate and map the SDGs within a plan or policy. Another case study highlighted the work being undertaken by Meath County Council who are working closely with a local group of citizens active in community work to localise SDGs. This is part of a European-wide project. And there are many other case studies. I know Offaly Local Development Company have been mapping programme outcomes to the SDGs, and Wicklow County Council and Wicklow PPN have also developed a mapping tool for kind of sharing what SDG initiatives are running within their area. So there's lots of stuff available on the draft plan if you want to have a look at it. And I suppose just to mention, Agenda 2030 really emphasises the need for an inclusive and localised approach to the SDGs. So while the SDGs themselves are global, their achievement will depend on our ability to make them a reality locally. And SDG 11, which is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable, was included in response to the growing recognition of the importance of local authorities and communities to sustainable development. So there are 46 actions with 108 individual measures in the draft plan. I've included a sample here on the slide, which relate to local authorities or community engagement. And I suppose just to highlight that incorporating the SDGs into the LECPs is an action included in the draft plan. And there would be the intention that we'd be reporting on that. So just to draw your attention to that. And now in the last couple of minutes, I just want to touch upon how you can incorporate the SDGs into the LECPs. So really, it's just a matter of considering how your work aligns and contributes to the SDGs and the targets, and whether the work is in keeping with the overarching principles of Agenda 2030, which will include leaving no one behind, partnerships for the goals, adherence to human rights, etc. And I note the emphasis within the LECPs is in relation to participation, inclusion, collaboration, which are all very much in keeping with Agenda 2030. So it's just framing it as such and highlighting this approach and contribution you're making. So in terms of the LECP, we'd be encouraging you to map the high-level goals and objectives under the framework and the actions under the implementation plans to the SDGs. As the intention is that local authorities will be reporting back on their work on the SDGs. It will make it a lot easier if the mapping has already been done. And I suppose the method on how reporting will be carried out is going to be considered and agreed with the LGMA, so that hasn't been sorted yet. But having plans which are mapped to the SDGs will certainly make extraction of relevant material much easier. We do have a document which I can circulate after the meeting if people like. It captures the 17 goals, and when you click on the goals, it brings you to the relevant targets. And it's really worth familiarising yourself with the goals and targets because the mapping exercise is then actually quite straightforward. So it's just a matter of going through them against the work that you have. And I suppose the detail is in the targets. For example, SDG 16 is known as peace, justice and strong institutions, but it also includes ensuring inclusive participatory and representative decision-making at all levels, ensuring public access to information and promoting non-discriminatory policies for sustainable development. So you mightn't always get the detail if you just read the overarching goal. So I did have a quick look at some of the examples of work that was given in the LECP guidelines and did a very quick 5-minute mapping exercise to give an example of how the work can be linked with the SDGs. And when looking at the detail of the work, it can probably be linked a lot more than this. But this was just an initial kind of quick job I did to kind of demonstrate how work very much relates to the different sustainable development goals. So for example, under number 2 there, bullet point number 2, physical, social, economic and environmental regeneration of deprived urban and rural communities. This would feed into SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 9 and SDG 15. So work is very much contributing, so it's just a matter of making those links. And finally, my very final slide is just to highlight SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, and the target underneath, which relates to partnerships between sectors, will be very much covered by the LECPs. So I just wanted to call that one out. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah. Just before you mute there, there's a question. Just to state again the name of the plan or the pilot project that Dublin City Council implemented, maybe if you could just share that again.
Oh yeah, so it's their corporate plan.
It was in their corporate plan. Okay,
yeah.
There was just a query about that.
Yeah, if you in our draft national implementation plan, there is a link to the corporate plan, but you can probably find it just by Googling as well.
Okay, thanks very much again, Hannah, for that. Just to repeat again, all of the presentations from the 2 previous webinars are available on the Department of Rural and Community Development website. If you go into the community development section of the website and look under local government, you'll find the presentations, and we'll be adding those after this webinar from today's event if anybody has a question. There was also a question there in relation to funding outside of the 8 Just Transition Fund areas for those types of initiatives. And I think quite a lot of the initiatives that are covered under the Just Transition Fund are areas that there are potential funding sources available, certainly in the area of, micro enterprise development and local enterprise development. The LEOs are there to fulfill that role across the country. Also in terms of training and retraining, the education and training boards have a particular function, and I'm sure most of them are represented on the LCDCs. There are some initiatives there that probably aren't clearly funded in other areas, like the repurposing of buildings in those former peatland areas. That's a specific one, I think that's in there. So there is also obviously the Community Action Programme Fund, which is quite substantially funded by the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and that's available. I think there may be further calls forthcoming on that. Okay, so now we move on to the next presentation. And I'm pleased to call on Kieran Lynch, and it's good to see Kieran again. Long time no see, Kieran.
How are you doing?
And Kieran he works currently with Community Engagement Partners. He had worked as a Planning and Development Officer for Kildare County Council for many years and was head of department at Tipperary Institute and at Limerick IT. And more recently, he's been involved in the delivery of climate action training for the CARO office in the Atlantic Seaboard. So, Kieran, I know you've a very substantial presentation you sent on to us, so we are limited to 15 minutes. So, and again, I repeat, the presentations will be available to everybody after the event. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and thanks for joining in. I appreciate you also had to take time out of another event, so really appreciate that. And over to you. So can you share your slides, please? And
thanks a million.
We can get started.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry now. Let's resolve this. Okay. Now. Okay, can we see that?
Yeah, that looks great,
yes.
Kieran. Thanks.
Very good.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Okay, good morning, everybody. I know that we have a very short time, so I will whip through this, and some of it I kind of skip over probably. First of all, I'd like to say that this is based on work that I did with Dr. Darren Barry of the Technological University of the Shannon and the CARO Atlantic Seaboard North. We gave some workshops and a webinar actually on this issue. Unfortunately, I haven't heard what's gone on before because I've only just landed in and then have to shoot off. So my apologies for that. So just a few things, I suppose, just to say the way we were approaching this, the climate change is real and now. It's a challenge. That is actually a challenge of getting that across to people. We've no choice to respond, obviously. And I suppose responses will have to happen at many, many levels. I would say about the LECP activities is, of course, it's not the solution in its own, obviously, but it could be an important part of it. And I think that's an important thing to remember as well, is that we're and in fact, well, from my perspective, obviously this is just my perspective, that the LECP can make an important contribution, but lots of other things are going to be happening as well, and it will fit in within those. And obviously those involved in working and designing the LECP interact with communities, businesses and their organizations in a special way, which is kind of ongoing and deep, and it gives them a special way of encouraging climate action. I'm going to skip through that because you've probably gone through all of that already. I suppose the point I just wanted to say that the process is important, and this point of engagement is important right across all stages of the process. And I just say a few words about each element of the process as we go through it. So in terms of setting the goals and the socioeconomic analysis stage, obviously it's important that some of the climate parameters are included in the analysis. The goals are obviously going to be very high level, and there may only be a very small number of specific climate goals, but I suppose the most important thing in our view on this is that all the goals have the potential to incorporate a climate element in the objectives and in the actions. And I think that is one important point maybe to bear in mind, even when all of the goals are being developed, that the climate element of it is reflected on, along with others. I know there will be other considerations as well, but the climate is one of the things that's included. Because what may very well happen, I feel, is that the climate elements within a variety of goals across all of the goals will be important. And of course, there is this intention that the climate mitigation and adaptation actions will be cross-cutting, and they'll cross-cut business and community. So it will enter into the economic and the community aspects of things. And in this particular context, I suppose we talk a little bit about business in the context of business as a community, because business in any county is certainly a community of interest, even if it's not a geographic community. It may also have specific geographic elements to it as well, but it is an important type of community to consider. And of course, there are indicators. There is some information available and it will be available. This comes from another one of the presentations here about the portal, the information portal, and so it's important probably to pick up on those elements when the climate goals are being thought about. So some of the areas which might be considered for climate-related goals, obviously look at the climate action plan, look at the county development plan. I mean, I know a lot of the county development plans now and the newer ones being developed have very strong elements of climate action in them. And so it's obviously the LECP has to be consistent with the development plans. So it's worth looking at them and drawing from them. But certainly important, you can look at emissions, CO2, NO2, CFC, the CFCs, fluorocarbons, and the whole zero carbon idea. The energy use by industry, business and households, that's another kind of area. Renewable energy generation, the circular economy is another area to look at, transport, agriculture. And then we can look at the mitigation elements with regard to habitat protection, the responses to flooding, response to severe weather events. So there's a wide area there where goals could be considered. And even if these don't end up as goals, all of them, they can end up as objectives perhaps under some of the goals. Moving on then just to the question of consultation, and I suppose this is an important consideration, and the most important thing on the consultation, I would say, at the consultation on the goals, the most important thing is to reflect on who are you consulting, and to include it in your planning, so that when you're planning your consultation processes, remember about the element of climate in that consultation. And it will be maybe one of them a more challenging type of consultation than others, in that not everybody will have the same awareness, the same knowledge, the same understanding of climate as they will about many other matters that they'll be more intuitively engaged with. So it's important to reflect on it and include it in your planning. Have to make it real and meaningful for others. This is one of the big things about the climate engagement, is making it real so that people can understand what it means, because some of the things like the goals and so on, they're kind of abstract in one sense. They can be abstract, and it's important to bring them down into a reality so that people understand what the implications are, understand maybe what different types of approach are. So some work might need to be done on that in the context of the consultation. And look, challenging about communicating climate change, won't go into it in great detail, but I mean, one of the difficulties is it's hard to see it as being immediate. A lot of people find it hard. Even the language that we use talks about 20, 30, 40, 50, but it is now. We all know it is now. Sometimes what we as a nation do seem being limited when, bad things are happening in lots of other places, India, China, Brazil, places like that. What can we do? We have to have an answer to that question. We're asking for transformational change. No point in denying that we are. We're not asking for small changes anymore. And we are asking for changes in lifestyle. So I think this is an opportunity to engage in all of that with people. Obviously, there'll be differential capacities in different communities, differential effects on different communities as well. I know you've been talking about the just transition. That's an important concept right across. I know it is active in the Midlands at the moment, but it's an important concept everywhere. And then obviously you'll have multi-interest communities. What do you do with those? How do you engage with those? So some kind of the objectives for climate change under the economy, you can, it's not all negative, of course. I mean, we talk about it in kind of negative context, but there are lots of positives as well. So for example, new jobs and green jobs, that's certainly something to focus on. Improve competitiveness, because, going green makes a community or an area more competitive now. obviously cleaner transport we'll end up with, cleaner technology, we'll end up with, you know, better environment, better air quality and so on. By localizing things like food, energy and water, we'll help to secure our supplies, a real positive there. You know, building this low carbon society, that can be another kind of objective there. We need to look at financing. That has to be looked at in some way or another. I don't know how that might come into the LECP, not my area of expertise, but it might be something to think of. And then obviously the capacity to respond and adapt to extreme events. That adaptation element is very important in the whole climate action area. It's not all about mitigation. A lot of it is about adaptation as well. And then on the community, you know, community benefit funds, of course, are there, and community energy projects. These are going to be, these community benefit funds will be really positive and under the renewable energy, and how they are used, putting in good processes for using those funds is important. The new SICAP program, of course, will be another area which can engage with climate and indeed with the just transition in particular as well. Obviously, training and capacity building really important because it's a kind of a new area, and it's quite science-based. You know, there's new understandings needed beyond what we had. We can look at enterprise, of course, enterprise hubs, co-working spaces, and then of course we have the public community support action programs. And just thinking then a little bit about the implementation end of it and the kind of actions. I mean, some of the kinds of things, what we really have is, I just skip over that one. Some of the ideas that you might think about is, for example, a climate action leadership circle. I mean, who are going to be the leaders on climate action within your communities and within your various sectors? And, you know, identifying and supporting them, because peer influence is really, really important in generating climate action and getting people to take things on board. So, so spending some time on developing this kind of leadership within your community is important. Obviously, the whole transport system important, urban and rural, important in all places, and is going to be a key. It is a key element as well in addressing the climate action. And indeed, things are happening with it, but an area that has to be worked at. The whole working from home area, how are you going to look at that in the context of the LECP? Because it obviously has a climate action potential and a climate action implication. Partnerships with other, you know, partnerships for marketing within the green space, within the climate related enterprises and so on. How can they come together to benefit more from their from the fact that they're climate aware and responding to the climate. Some other things, there's a green roof initiative. That's something that could be promoted. Has very, you know, multiple positive effects. You can see a little photograph there on the right, but, you know, within urban areas in particular, you know, it can manage stormwater, mitigates heat islands. You can get biodiversity, improves insulation. I mean, increased longevity of the waterproof membranes, and indeed provides a green space for people. So, you know, that could be an area that could be looked at. And then there's a variety of existing programs that could be promoted. So, for example, business in the community, there's the Ireland's low carbon pledge, and there's something, I can't remember how many, about 50 companies I think have signed up to this now. Again, promoting that. And there's a water stewardship program for business. Obviously, the work of the LEOs in this whole area is something to incorporate. And then even looking at ESCOs, these are the energy supply companies which work with business to reduce their energy investment costs. So the ESCO does the investment, and then it's paid off over time by the business through the reduction in energy costs. Something to think about as well. Then obviously the whole skill development for business. So it's giving businesses the capacity to do things themselves, as well as supporting them in doing things. So there is a couple of programs there just mentioned there. There'll be others as well, but there's a digital skills for green economy called DGECO. You can look it up. And then there's a climate ready academy for business as well. And thinking about how might they be engaged with, how might they be developed within your own area. And then highlighting the real green businesses, I suppose, giving them a space, promoting them, again, back to the peer, the example again. And then maybe particularly thinking about social enterprises with a green agenda. How can they be supported within the LECP might be another area to consider. And just going on to the community, one thing to consider, we've promoted this in a few different areas, but it's a community climate action plan. community-based. I mean, I know a lot of you will be familiar with community-based plans, some of them to do with statutory planning, but we're thinking more about socio-economic and cultural type plans at a community level. We're thinking about putting in place some of those and making that a program over the period of the LECP to develop these within communities. And it has a lot of advantages in terms of communication, engagement, giving an opportunity for things to be discussed, giving an opportunity for people who may suffer more for the impact on them to be mitigated and so on. So it can assist with future funding applications as well. It can incorporate a variety of things, an asset-based approach, which is always good, green mapping, which is a whole technique in its own right, obviously the community energy projects, and then you have you already have the sustainable energy communities model. So it might just be something to consider. It contains a lot, of course. Other ideas then, climate change competition between communities and groups. Communities love competitions. If we look at tidy towns, we look at pride of place, and the enterprise towns and so on. So maybe there's something there worth thinking about. Carbon footprinting as a communal exercise. I often think this is really interesting because carbon footprinting is an interesting thing when you do it for yourself, and it really brings things to your attention that you mightn't be otherwise aware of. And doing this as a communal exercise might be something worth considering. Putting a climate change element into all funding programs. I think this is important. So that all funding programs have an element in them which says either you must show how this will be contribute to climate action, or you will get extra marks for showing how this will contribute to climate action. So something of that nature. Maybe a sustainable transport plan for some pilot areas, particularly probably a rural thing, maybe rather than an urban thing. Local citizens' assembly on climate action. The Citizens Assembly model, I think, has been quite successful at the national level, worth considering at a local level. And then work with the local HEIs, your higher education institutes, participatory action research projects within communities. I'm sure some of you have been involved in some of those already. I think there's a lot of scope within this area for that. And interestingly, information produced when people work on producing the implemented information themselves is often more believed and accepted than information which is presented to them. And then the climate change ambassadors and champions, worth thinking about. Social influencers, this is the life we're in. This is the model of where a lot of behavior change now happens and where people look to for guidance. And I think it's something that we can't ignore. And then look, within the whole area of habitat management and so on, there's a whole series of things that could be done. Community forests and mini forests, very interesting idea, have all sorts of positive effects. Pollinator areas, I see some organizations getting into that area at the moment. Wetlands management and maintenance, bog restoration projects, natural flood relief barriers. There's so many things that can be done and looked at and supported. And a lot of these are kind of happening already at a small level, and they can be expanded and developed. And then the idea of a community-based transport hub, which could come into your community action plan, but that would incorporate parking, EV charging, public transport and e-bike rental all together in a coherent space so that the whole transport thing could happen in some coherent kind of a way. Very briefly, just on monitoring and evaluation, I'll finish now in a couple of minutes. It's just smart indicators are suggested, obviously, and KPIs are looked at high level, one for the high level objectives and one for the actions. I'll just skip over that a little bit, but it's just in terms of the KPIs, it's important, I just think, to consider, and I know you were mentioning the SDGs, and that's excellent, and relating to those. I think getting specific KPIs that will and smart indicators that will properly report on the things that you're looking to achieve is really important. So you need to be clear on why you're choosing a particular KPI. Why is that being chosen? On what basis is it going to represent what you're trying to achieve? What unit are you going to gather it at is the other important thing, and what interval is it going to be gathered at? Sometimes if the interval is too long, then it's not terribly useful in terms of influencing action. That's our responding to action or helping with monitoring. So, the other question then is the reliability of it. Is it who is it going to be collected by? Is it a census or a sample? Is it a survey or self-reporting? All those kind of questions. I think some good effort to go into the KPIs is worth thinking about. And Sometimes there's unpublished information that you might be able to access, even though it's not normally available, but that would be a very good KPI. And sometimes it's not. And I would say sometimes it's worth considering putting into your program some things that you will actually need to gather specifically for the LECP, and putting into place some processes to allow that to happen. So listen, this was very quick, obviously 15 minutes, just a few thoughts at huge speed. I know it's a journey that's new to all of us, and that's another thing to bear in mind. And the learning curve is steep, you know, and the issue is real and urgent, and one of the real jobs is to get out the urgency of it. That is a critical aspect of all of this, I think, because we have the opportunity during the engagement to do that. And it needs this blend, you know, of the scientist, business advisor, engineer, communicator, community development worker. It needs everybody together. And I suppose one of the other things to reflect on is how is that going to be made happen within this whole LECP process? How is this range of skills going to be brought to bear? Because I think it is needed. And while, you know, we may all have some understanding and knowledge of the science of all of this and the technical sides of it. I mean, I know myself, I mean, I rely on Darren always on the science side of it. And especially when the questions come up, who answers the questions? If it's a technical question, I probably won't be able to answer it, but we have. But look, bring it all together isn't easy. We have a good framework and the guidelines, I think. And, you know, if we can get this teamwork going with this blend, I think that will really be helpful. The innovation is needed, obviously. And I think perseverance, always, I often say patience and perseverance, two crucial requirements of working in the public service. And if you can have those, you know, it will be very helpful. So listen, good luck to everybody and successful traveling, as I say.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. And I think, yeah, your presentation, I think, will be a very useful reference document for everybody involved in the LECP planning process. So thanks once again for coming in on that. So our next presentation is coming then.
I gotta go.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's from a local authority experience. So really appreciate colleagues in Kildare County Council have agreed to share their experiences and their proposals in relation to this space. And there's three people involved there. Joe Boland, who's the Director of Services with Kildare County Council, Breda Maher, the Regional Coordinator in the CARO office, and also Paul O'Rourke, who's a late substitute, who's a local coordinator from the CARO office in Kildare. So over to you, please.
Can everybody hear me okay? First question. And can everybody see me as well?
Yes. Yeah, so we can
yes.
hear you and see the slides and see you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Just again to introduce my colleague. Well, first of all, to introduce myself, I'm Joe Boland. I'm Director of Environmental Services, Water Services and Climate Action in Kildare County Council. And I also lead the Eastern Midlands Climate Action Regional Office. Breda Maher is our Regional Coordinator in the Climate Action Regional Office. And Paula O'Rourke is our Climate Action Officer. Breda, I think, is rolling the slides on my behalf. Thanks, Breda. So we'll move on to the first one. It's going to be three elements for our presentation. I'll take the first one, local government regional approach to climate action. And then Paula, our Climate Action Officer, will come in with some specific local examples. And Breda's going to wrap up with some key messages. So I hope that's okay with everybody. So we'll keep going. You obviously had presentations earlier on regarding the kind of policy context and the legislative context, and we won't go over that again, so don't worry. But deeply enshrined within all of that is and emphasised within that is the leadership role of local government and climate action. It's also reiterated in the National Adaptation Framework. Local government is well positioned to provide that leadership role, where the entity which are very close to local communities. We have a range of fora at local level in terms of municipal districts, in terms of tied towns groups, in terms of, you know, the PPNs and other different entities as well. You know, our librarians, our arts officers, our environmental awareness officers, our sports partnership facilitators, all who work out in the front lines of our local communities. So we do a lot of infrastructure work as well, but we're not just one big civil engineering entity. You know, we kind of do a lot of the softer side of things as well. You know, I myself, in the environmental role, I kind of in charge of flood relief measures here in Kildare. We've progressed about 20 million euros worth of projects in the last 10 years, with another 40 million coming down the line. But so it's a range of interventions at local level, and so we're well positioned to give a leadership role in relation to climate action. With strong relationships with local communities, again, particularly bear in mind the role of the elected members as well within the local government framework. I suppose the ability maybe to pull things together locally is important, just coordinated and integrated approach. I think that's a kind of first key point I might make, is that when we talk about climate action, you know, there is a tendency to go off in different tangents, you know, so I think to be strategic, I think is very important, particularly in the context of the LECP. I think it's a really important point. As well as that, there's an opportunity to build capacity within the sector across all of the services and functions. Probably I'll come to that in a little bit more detail later on, but like climate action, just to make the point at this stage, climate action permeates all the work we do. If you go right through all our spectrum of services, in relation to housing, particularly in the context of retrofitting, roads, in relation to public lighting, active travel, the whole area of planning, the link between planning, spatial planning and economic development is becoming very significant. The whole area of biodiversity, for example, economic opportunities to our local enterprise offices, you know, and I could go on, and that is permeate all of the work of what we do. So next slide, Brina. Just talk a bit about the Climate Action Regional Offices. These were established in 2018, 4 offices. You can see the map there. The green ones, Eastern and Midlands, is quite a significant area. It extends from the Atlantic seaboard over Leitrim up to the Cooley Peninsula, down to Wexford, north to the Waterford, Cork border. So some 17 local authorities within that. It's unusual in the sense that the regions were determined by topographical or geographical vulnerabilities and risks, as opposed to administrative convenience. So I suppose even in a small country like Ireland, you will have different kind of climatic risks, be it coastal erosion in the case of the Western Seaboard counties, or be it urban heating and cooling in the big cities, or, you know, fluvial flooding, particularly in the areas that I'm encompassed, which the Eastern Midlands. So each of them initially was given a specialism in those particular areas, but I think time has moved on significantly. The legislation has moved on, and we've had a lot of developments in the interim period. So in terms of our range of specialisms has expanded very significantly, and we'll come to that maybe in later slides. But and again, maybe just to make an important point at this stage, I think, to be fair to our parent departments tends to be mainly, though not exclusively, Department of Housing Planning and Local Government, and also Department, and maybe more so the Department of Environment, Communications, Climate Action, and also a DRCD as well in more recent times, but other government departments as well. But to be fair, I think it reflects well on the local government sector and also their parent departments, that we would have 4 climate action regional offices who employ about 20 people, I'd say roughly, and those people are out in front dealing with progressing climate action issues. So I think that's good. The role of the CAROs are mandated to drive climate action and build capacity within the local authority sector in climate action, and in particular to provide alignment between national, sectoral and local climate policy. That sounds a little bit bureaucratic, but I suppose the essence really of the CAROs, what a key reason for the CAROs is to try and pull things together locally. It's probably an important point, because there's a lot happening in terms of the legislative and policy landscape. So pull things together both locally and regionally is probably an important part of what they do. And to mainstream climate action across all local authority functions, which I mentioned earlier on. Key development was in 2020, where all local authorities published their adaptation strategies, all 31 of them, all across the line, all within the time frame. And that was, again, it was a key role of the CAROs to kind of pull all that together. I might make another important point at this stage, is the kind of whole area of governance. The local authority adaptation strategies contained a significant number of local actions. In the case of Kildare County Council here, from memory, is about 120 actions. in various areas, be it in the areas of biodiversity, be it in the areas of infrastructure, be it in the areas of water services or parks, community activation. It's pleasing to note that if you take a local authority sector view of this, we have a lot of analysis done on it. Actually, it's maybe about 85% of all of those actions have either been progressed or are in the course of being progressed. But I think an important point really on the adaptation strategies, like adaptation is kind of very much, you probably are familiar with the distinction between adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation is really about a coping mechanism, might be a good way of putting it. It's the inevitability that, you know, climate action is, you know, it's probably going to get worse before it gets any better, and try and cope with it as best we can. A key point I was just going to make was that as part of the adaptation strategies, there was a section there on governance, and under that section we established climate action teams. We established a dedicated climate action strategic policy committee. Climate action tends to be a standing item now on all meetings with senior management team, tends to be a standing item in meetings of corporate policy group. And as well as that, in many counties, it's a standing item on the agenda for the council as well. So that's an important point. The whole governance aspect is very important. We had the local authority climate action charter as well that was signed in 2019 and sort of signed I think in 2020, but relates to the climate action plan 2019, action 147. In essence, what that was that the local authorities agreed to significantly pick up the ball in relation to climate action and run with it. And to be fair to the minister, he agreed to support us particularly in terms of resources. So I think that's the essence of it. There's 23 commitments in it. I obviously haven't time to go through them all, but I picked out a few there that may be relevant to today's discussion in terms of developing links between citizens to give voice to their understanding and concerns, cultivating and actively participating in partnerships with enterprise community and voluntary groups, supporting enterprise through the LEOs and the LCD office to exploit opportunities, to play a key role in helping to build and implement sustainable local citizen engagement. So there's a lot of strings to that bow. So again, I think that was a good strategic thing to do, and I think it reflects well on the local government sector as well as on the relevant minister. Next slide, Breda. Another important point as well, again, this strategic context I think is very important. The sector, I think this reflects well on them. The sector have their own strategy, this local government sector I'm talking about, and their own vision as to where they want to go with climate action. And that includes 6 high-level goals, and when Breda might move on to those. Number 1, fostering governance, leadership and partnerships, achieving local government sector emission and energy targets, delivering on adaptation and resilience, mobilising climate action in communities, mobilising expertise, enterprise, support transition to inclusive net zero circular economy, and just transition for communities disadvantaged by decarbonising projects. So therefore there's a strategic vision there on the part of the local government sector, and also the governance is in place, and also the intent is in place. So this is in addition to all the policy aspects and legislative aspects which have been set out there earlier on. So the key local government initiatives to date, I might just spend a minute or two on this slide because I think it's important. So obviously it's not, you know, kind of, I think this is a really important fundamental point, and I actually took the liberty of looking at because of this presentation, I took the liberty of looking at the review of the LCDCs by DRCD in 2019, and try to link a little bit with where I can. Sorry, first point I would make, I think this is really important. If you're looking for a sector, in this case the local government sector, to go in strategically in a different direction, you must give them the skills and capacity to be able to do that. I think that's important, and it's so fundamental. Even though we were given an initial specialism in the area of fluvial flooding, the Eastern Midlands Climate Action Region Office developed a specialism in this area and led out in relation to this. And I think this reflects well on everybody. We aim to train all 31,000 people who work in local authorities and including about 1,000 elected members. I won't go through the detail of that training. There's different training for different staff members, or whether you're on a climate action team or otherwise. But I'd say we're about 18,000 people have had training. And it's not just the skills, it's the confidence as well. It's a way of getting people on board as well. It's a way of getting buy-in. And to be fair to the Department of Environment, Communications and Climate Action, they have actually funded it as cost running within around 2021 to 2023 is 2.3 million euros. The other key point is that there's opportunities arising, significant opportunities, again, bear this in mind for your LECPs. Climate action is not all about doom and gloom, it's not all about risk, there's significant economic opportunities arising, so always look for opportunity. And I have a separate slide coming on that one, so just skip on to the next one. The other point as well is the whole area of networking. And the whole, I refer to it as strategic collaboration. You know, you need to reach out to other entities. If you go back to the training program just for a second, there's 18 significant entities, including government departments and semi-state organizations, third level institutions, you know, involved in that training program. Okay, but strategic collaboration is an important element. I would consider this to be an exemplar. We reached out to the GAA. There's a lovely picture there of Crow Park actually, and I intend being in Crow Park next Sunday as well, just to throw that one in. The GAA, if you look at the GAA and look at the third sector, have a lot in common, particularly the extent to which they kind of permeate into local communities, particularly the extent to which they're involved in local communities and can shape local communities. And the intention here, and is progressing very well, is that GAA would kind of have a green, its clubhouses green. It would develop its own toolkit. It would encourage the kind of green sustainable agenda among its clubs and among its participants, and through its transition year leadership program. I think that's been interrupted a bit by COVID, but I think that's going very well. We're always looking at other opportunities for strategic collaboration, be it with the arts sector, you know, telling the climate action story visually through arts. I think it's a good idea to maybe the whole area of financing, be it retrofits or other areas, and also that's an important point. The governance and I mentioned the governance, and I probably have mentioned the linkages. The other areas, regional energy projects, the challenges coming down the line are far more stretched. There's no question. The next emphasis on the climate plans will be both adaptation and mitigation, and will be linked with government policy. Again, important to look at this strategically. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that every local authority will need to have access to an energy agency or an energy bureau. And we're working on that at the moment. Here in the Mideast, for example, we recently went to tender in relation to looking for access to an energy agency. Dublin have Codema, which is kind of it's probably an exemplar actually in that area. We have a few of them around the country, but not every county has access to an energy agency.
Joe, sorry to interrupt you. We're kind of running on in time there. Is it okay if you move on to the other two speakers there? Is that okay?
Is that the last slide, Rita? Is this my last slide? No? Okay. Okay, sorry folks. If you want to go on, move on. Thanks.
Special mention.
Yeah, sorry, if there's anything in particular you just want to wrap up. Sorry, Joe, I'm sorry not for interrupting you.
On that last slide, the whole area of mainstream, just maybe mention, if you give me 30 seconds on the whole area of mainstreaming, you know, it kind of is permeating everything we do in relation to housing and public lighting, for example, spatial planning in the context of decarbonising zones, public realm projects, active travel, enterprise I mentioned, green procurement, linkage with circular economy, the just transition, particularly for the Midlands counties, that we don't leave people behind us, protecting and enhancing the national environment, and the whole community bottom-up approach as well, particularly through existing forums such as elected members, BPNs, and okay, I'll leave it at that, folks. There's a lot going on in the space, obviously. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paula O'Rourke, and I'm the Climate Action Coordinator for Kildare. Unfortunately, Ciara wasn't available today, so it's just the way it worked out. So anyhow, we hope to inform you about the climate action initiatives ongoing in Kildare and their influence on the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. So as you all know, under the climate adaptation strategy that we have to put in, we have to look at local level of what needs to be done. So I won't go over the policy that's come before that given time, but basically we're trying to ensure that the key risks are understood and the vulnerabilities in our climate plan. Then when it comes to the latest plan that we have, we're now going to use not only adaptation, but also mitigation strategies to make everything work for us into the future. We're a little bit different in Kildare. We're signatories to the Covenant of Mayors, and therefore we're going to make our CCAP, which is not CICAP as you would have, but CCAP, Sustainable Energy Climate Action Plan, and our Climate Action Plan one document. It may also reference the decarbonising zone from Maynooth. We'll have to wait and see depending on the guidelines. Next slide, please. So the big thing for you is the Just Transition Plan. And West Kildare was one of the first ones to be done in the country. At a strategic level, it is extremely important that we do not leave anyone behind in the transition from the cessation of peat harvesting industry to new economies. This plan has outlined exactly how that can be done. There's three key themes: economy, society, and the environment. We created this in collaboration with everybody within the community, whether it was from industry, community-led, councillors, etc. In fact, when we put out our draft, the amount of positive feedback that we got was so large that we ended up having to extend the process by 8 to 10 weeks to hear all the voices. This plan actually has a deprivation index in it, which shows what areas have to be targeted. And as I said, it's a grassroots up approach. There's 15 thematic actions. There's 3 priority enabling actions. And if all those 3 are realised, all the thematic actions can be accomplished. So those 3 are a coordinated programme of activity to bid in for Just Transition Fund monies using the plan, a critical partnership building process, and incorporating the Just Transition Plan into the local economic community plan. So as you see, your role is essential in this to make this document and the capabilities of it statutorily correct. The climate and energy management team in Kildare, again, we've done something a little unusual. We've actually put the climate action team and energy management team together. We have 40 representatives on that who are across all the different functional areas, and we have people asking to join us. Our job is to deliver the climate change adaptation strategy and, of course, to put together the new one. There's 7 sub-groupings that we have in that, from energy, community, health and well-being, natural resources and cultural infrastructure, drainage and flood management, land use and development, infrastructure and built environment, local adaptation, governance, and business opportunities. We had an orientation session last Thursday, which is very much interactive to allow us to look at where we need to go to next with regard to our new plan. We looked at the learnings from our existing climate change adaptation strategy. We identified other collaborators that we need and how to streamline the process internally so we can move forward. Next slide, please, Rudy. Thank you. So the Climate Innovation Fund, it's a little bit unusual. We piloted last year with the help of the celebrated LECP MD, who provided us with LPT money. All 5 MDs have come forward this year with the LPT money, allowing us to make sure that a minimum of 5,000 to 25,000 is granted to those that apply. We don't mind what background this person has, as long or a group of people have, as long as they're doing something that's innovative in the area of climate action. It can be data-based, it can be nature-based, it can be engineering. We do not mind. So anyone who might know someone who lives or works in Kildare, they have on the 29th to apply. It's a very simple application form. Next slide, please. So then the SECs, we had a really good meeting on just last Saturday. The idea is that we want the sustainable energy communities to reactivate themselves. There's 500 around the country, there's 25 in Kildare. The previous year, Kildare made it possible for a number of SECs to progress their energy master plans by bridging the finance needed, and then we recoup that from the SAI. So those 4, Maynooth, Kilcullen, Clane and Munster Evans, they represent anything from very large urban areas down to small rural villages. The aim of this is to provide us with 20 properties that will be brought into an SAI retrofit funding programme later on this year. That will be everything from housing, community facilities, business, etc. And the idea is that we will build a team together that will then be able to do this. We do this in collaboration, guys, with Green Team from Dunleer, which is an SEC that then became a social business. So if they can make an opportunity of an SEC, so can we. Also, we were very delighted on that day to be honoured with the presence of Colin Markey, an MEP. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that we do, we try to lead by example. So we have, under the arts, we've got Stitching the Community Together, which is an interactive piece with intergenerational aspects to it. So we have schools aligned with care facilities, and we're using VR to instill the use of wool for the older and younger generations to learn from each other. We also last year had our first Kildare Climate and Energy Week, and that was to demystify climate action for everybody within Kildare. We have started this year looking at Fill the Gap. It's a program that we're looking at to scope out with the agricultural sector. What is the areas, what would they be like to do perhaps in the area of agritourism to supplement their income, as a lot of them have lost income from the summer work they would have done with Board Namona. And finally, as we said, again, we want to lead by example. So this is an example of the retrofitting of a fire station in Newbridge. While we have now sorted out the fabric of the building and how it can be reduced in carbon footprint, we're now looking at our vehicles even more in depth, and we have got a number of aspects of research going on that may be able to fuel that with a very, very low carbon footprint. So Rita, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paula. And just to wrap up the key messages really, and I think Kieran Lynch in his presentation has really wrapped this up very, very well. And I'm just going to keep my video off, unfortunately, because my bandwidth started to wobble during the presentation. So I'm trying to hold on to that. I'll turn it on when I'm finished. Just that the LECP is a key instrument to promote climate action within local communities. It can make a hugely important contribution on positive climate action. If at all possible, just you know, a little bit of guidance. Take your cues from your climate change adaptation strategy at local level, the local authority charter as well that was signed, and the actions and commitments that are made therein. The local government overarching sectoral climate strategy, that's our vision, that's our ambition for the entire local network of local authorities. And then in tandem, or probably in parallel with making the LECP, is the local authority climate action plan process as well. So there is synergies, and a lot of synergies that can be capitalized upon there. Joe spoke about mainstreaming. That's exactly it. It's just kind of piggybacking on work that's already being done and reorientating that with a climate action dimension on it. Maximise the local authority climate action team that exists within your local authority as well. Tap into the skill sets within that, tap into the resources, tap into initiatives that are ongoing as well for the purposes of developing your LECP. Kieran Lynch again touched on this. Look at climate action through the lens of opportunity. There's significant opportunity there with new growth, green jobs, new products, all the innovation side of things, and envision how a climate neutral society will look, and the benefits that cleaner air will bring, improved health and well-being can bring, enhanced civic pride, for example, and even placemaking. And just a final thought, be ambitious, because we need to get to achieve our targets by being ambitious and sticking our head above the parapet, so to speak, as well. So we'll leave it off there. Thanks very much. I will turn my camera back on there now. Sorry about that. Thanks a million.
Okay, thanks very much. And again, thanks once again to Joe and to Breda and to Paula for your presentation. Look, and unfortunately we didn't have enough time maybe to give enough time, but certainly again, just to say we will be sharing the presentations. There's a huge amount of food for thought there. And I think what's also very encouraging for me is that a lot of the work that needs to be done is already being done. A lot of the initiatives that possibly will fit in very well with the LECP strategies have already been identified. And I'm aware that local authorities will be working on parallel climate action plans, which in turn will feed into actions, even at a high level. Maybe in the LECPs, one of the strategic objectives should be to develop and implement the climate action plan, and then the actions in the climate action plan follow from that. So huge synergies there I can see in the work that's being done. Okay, so we had intended having a kind of a networking breakout session, but I'm conscious the time is running on and people will probably be thinking about their lunch. So Ali is going to introduce, we have a very innovative feedback tool that we have at our disposal called Menti. So I'm going to hand over to Ali. So there's an opportunity for you all to give us some feedback on 2 questions we were going to pose. So this is maybe a way of short-circuiting it and keeping us largely on track in terms of timing. So I'm just going to hand over to Ali, and she's just going to explain how you can give feedback directly and that we can all see your feedback.
Great, thanks, Kieran. Yes, so those of you who've been with us in, I think in the first webinar, we used this again, and I think it would be nice because we're coming towards the end, so we won't have time to talk together, but it's just a way for us all to just sort of process, make sense of, respond to what everything we've been hearing this morning and get a sense of what others are reflecting as well. So I'll let you know how we are going to do that for those who haven't done it before. So I'm just going to put a link in the chat here. So if you could kind of have your eye on the chat, you'll see a little link there, a blue link to menti.com. I could invite you all to click on that and respond to the first question that you see showing up there at the moment, which is, what are 2 ideas that you intend to implement into your own LECP framework based on the presentations you've heard today? And I'll give a moment for everyone to start to respond to that. And then when I see those responses coming in, I will begin to share them. And let me know if any of you are not able to get into the tool, and I'll suggest another way of doing it. I'll just give it a little moment to see. There we are. Great, I can see some responses starting to come in. Okay, great. So there's a few responses starting to come in. So I'll begin to share these in the online room. And if you're still writing, do just carry on with that in the window that you're in until you're finished. That means the rest of us can see some of what's coming up. Great. So we can see climate action, particularly as a key theme that's coming up more than once here. Yeah, mapping on the SDGs, as we heard about from Hannah. It's coming up a number of times. Early engagement, great. And then I can see references here to the local citizens assembly and then citizen engagement. And actually even incorporating the SDG branding into the framework. Yeah, that's lovely. Meet people where they are in their lives. There's a real sort of underlining of the importance for actions and not having duplication. And I know that came out in what Hannah shared as well, that this latest plan on their side has definitely got actions in it. And great to have a reference to the arts, which kind of came through gently in a number of the presentations, but you can see that's probably a key element to include. Okay, so there's about 19 of us that have responded. If there's anyone else that would like to add in any ideas that are sparking in your mind after what we've heard today, do add them in there now. And what I'll do is probably move on to the next question for those people that had already finished. And you can probably just keep typing if you're just finishing one now. Yeah, great. And I see this reference to demystifying the SDGs has come up a couple of times, or demystifying climate action as well. Okay, so let me just stop sharing for a moment and I will move on to our second question of 2, which is, what challenges do you foresee in delivering climate action, sustainable development objectives throughout the lifetime of your new LECP? So you should see that new question there, or you might just need to refresh your screen in the window that you're on, or I can put the link again here. And thanks to Hannah for sharing some more SDG branding materials, which was one of the points that was coming up there. And just let me know if you can't see that new question. Oh, great, you can see some responses starting to come in. Okay, so just give it a moment for people to start to note down the challenges, and we can have a look at what's coming up. Okay, so some of the things we're seeing is effective coordination, staffing resources themselves, availability of funding, different political narratives, so right-wing leaning narratives that might be blocking the development of real climate action plans. Hard to see how impactful actions can be. It's interesting. Yeah, so more around, so we had funding, money, particularly in local authorities with poorer rates. Yeah, climate action objectives are seen as a positive rather than a negative. Okay, so a reminder there that if we're looking for quick solutions, that actually could be a real challenge, particularly with a challenge of this scale in terms of working on climate action. Avoiding overlap, so we had that point before about duplication and more around funding. And the sense of our resources being further stretched, so in the PPNs, for example. So a real issue around resources. And just difficult to convince people to adopt new ways of living. That's for all of us as citizens in our modern developed country. How do we bring everyone along on the journey? So this is still open if you're still writing in, and we'll have a record of all of this from today. Thank you so much for all of your responses, and just a small way to make this be a real collaborative conversation and feed into our ongoing work together. So I think what I'll do, Kieran, is just maybe stop sharing here, and people still typing, feel free to do that, and hand back to you just in case there's a time for any few final remarks before we end.
Okay, thanks very much, Ali. And again, I think that's a very useful tool to get a quick feedback from people in events such as this, because it's not, if we were in a large auditorium, it might be easier to do that, but we have to use the technology that's available. So thanks again. So there's an opportunity if anybody has any questions they want to ask at this stage, or any issues they want to clarify. We may not necessarily have all the answers today, but we certainly would take on board any questions that you'll have and seek to answer them. So the microphone is just, you can unmute yourself, and if you want to raise a question, please do so. So maybe Ali, if you can manage that for us, if you can see anybody raising their hand, or if any of the speakers want to respond to something maybe another speaker said, that's perfectly fine too.
Absolutely. So yeah, please do take this opportunity, and just a little reminder to click on the reactions button and the raise hand button, and then I'll see you and invite you to speak your questions. So yeah, this is your chance. We've got a few minutes left. Just maybe any questions or reflections before we close. It'd be great to hear. And just to say that well, just to let you know, Kieran, I see no digital hands waving at this point. So yeah, if there are, I'll let you know. Oh yeah, here we are. So we've got, well, I know Rob, you were going to say something, and also we have Alan. Should we maybe go to Alan and then perhaps, or come back to you, Rob? Yeah, okay. So Alan, just bringing you up onto the online stage.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks, Kieran. Look, I suppose it's more a comment, and I think it was reflected when I went back in through the Menti there. I think there's a couple of challenges around it, and the resources are probably the key bit. That's both in terms of kind of bringing it forward through the planning process, and it's when I talk about the resources, the human and the financial that are necessary, both in terms of getting the strategy right, but more importantly in terms of the action delivery. And I think one of the key pieces of it will be how you have the coordination between the consultation piece that we're going to be doing on the climate action plans, and then linking what is necessary to go into the LECP, because the LECP is not the silver bullet. You know, it's part of, Kieran Lynch referred to it as part of an overall program, or a whole series of pieces that have to be put together to make it happen. But I think it just to have that piece around it, and I think the coordination that's shown within sort of the outline what they gave there from Kildare County Council and some of the other speakers, that assists it. but it's very important that it's a realization. LECP is not the only tool. It's an important one of it, but it also needs resources in terms of delivery. And I suppose one of the things that drives the LECP will be, it has to have either the local authorities leading it, or it's the local authority with other stakeholders, and it has to be within the resources. So that's going to be the key challenge, the resources.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. Yep, okay. And over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much. So I was going to come just sort of just to reiterate from what some of the speakers said, but also actually a question that's come in there. Just to reiterate that, I suppose from the national dialogue side, that is an absolutely central, it's a key focus of ours, which is realizing the opportunities. It's really trying to flip that mindset to say, look, what can we achieve by doing this, as other speakers articulated far better than I. You know, it is about not just about things like air quality, etc., but literally, and this is what we talk when we talk about climate literacy, it's like people realizing what they can do to actually improve their quality of lives in a real and on a sort of on a quicker timescale as well, to help realize the benefits of this, not in real time, but at least close to, rather than, you know, in the abstract, which has always been the challenge of engaging people in behavioral change on the climate side. Just to come back on some practical points, we realize there's been a bit of a delay in terms of the provision of additional resources, and we are working very, very hard in DECC to bottom that out. And we'll have an update as soon as we humanly can. We'll have an update for all the local authorities on the provision of resources to help the development and implementation of the LECPs. And we're also working very actively with our colleagues in some local authorities and CAROs to finalise the guidelines. The reason why they've been revised to a certain extent is the inclusion of the decarbonisation zones as part of the LECPs as well. But we're in the final stages of reviewing them, and they should be issued fairly shortly. So that should give everybody a very good sort of guidance on what's required going forward. So just say thanks again to everybody, and I think that realising the opportunities has been a really good feedback coming out of everybody from this session. So very nice to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And I think at the end there, you've answered the question that came up from Francesca just around the time frame. So they're coming very soon. Okay, thanks very much for that, Rob. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, so just to say, I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. So yeah, that's where we're at this moment. Point. Okay, that's great. Okay, so look, we'll close that part of the session then, and thanks to the two commenters there, Alan and Rob. So just at this stage, I'm just going to wrap up. A big thank you to all our speakers, and reiterate again, the presentations will be available to everybody, and they're available to share as well with others in your local authorities or in the organizations that you represent, and that website is publicly available with all the previous presentations as well. A big thank you to everyone who's participated in the event, to our own team here in DRCD, to Ali for her excellent work again in looking after the technology for us, which is extremely helpful. And finally then, just to remind you again that our next event, which is going to look at the community elements and a number of thematic areas in the community and social development elements of your LECPs, is penciled in for the 22nd of June. So maybe just to put that into your diaries, if that's okay. And just in terms of resources, I suppose we're also conscious that there's been feedback to ourselves from LCDC chief officers and others around the pressures that people are under at the moment, and we fully appreciate that. Particularly in relation to the Ukraine response and the huge and urgent necessity the huge workload and the urgent necessity there. So we are aware that the Department of Local Government and Housing has made additional resources available to local authorities. We certainly will be hoping to enter into a dialogue with people maybe over the coming while to see how they're getting on in their LECP processes, and to see that maybe the resources that come available from the Department of Housing and Local Government to put in dedicated resources into the Ukraine response, hopefully over a period of time, will enable you to maybe resume the work you're doing, particularly those authorities that have found it necessary maybe to suspend the work on the LECP development. So we're very happy to dialogue with everybody on that and to support you every way we can. But just to assure you, we are listening to you. We do understand the pressures you're under, but we're also conscious that
quite a number of processes do require the LECP to be in place, not least actually the forthcoming leader calls will require a strategy to build the local development strategies on. So we do require, as much as possible and within reason, everybody to try and progress the process as much as possible at this time. And again, we're open to dialogue with you all in relation to that. But that's, certainly the fact that resources have now been made available towards that extra work, I think, as a first step in that process. So looking forward to hearing maybe your feedback in relation to that. Okay, so thank you all very much, and looking forward to seeing you all, or most of you certainly, on the 22nd of June. Okay, bye-bye.